I am your host, Nicole Will, and we thank you for joining us as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside elders, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversations. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I couldn't be more excited to introduce to you Angela Burton. She is the founder and chief writing motivator of Feet to the Fire Writers Workshops, a creative program that inspires older adults to challenge themselves through expressive writing. The program currently operates in 7 U.S. states, and in 2020, amidst the COVID pandemic, Feet to the Fire pivoted to launch an amazing consumer version, writers, kits, and virtual groups for those who are socially isolated by the pandemic. A really needed way for people to fill up their days writing the stories of their lives and finding purpose along the way. She also has created a podcast, Feet to the Fire Writers Workshops OUTLOUD, where you can hear interviews with the stories read by the writers themselves. Currently, the podcast is being listened to the US and abroad, from Canada to UK to Ireland and India. And so exciting, Angela was recently named a Next Avenue Influencer in Aging. Angela, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great introduction.
Yes. Well, you're doing so many amazing things. And, we got to connect a couple weeks ago. And part of me wishes we had recorded some of that conversation because we had such a great conversation, and hearing all that you're doing and how you're inspiring people to continue to connect with each other and live really full lives through writing. I just walked away from that. I had like the biggest smile on my face. I was so excited to
Oh,
then record this podcast.
that's awesome. That's really good.
Yay.
I think when you really care about what you do and it's coming from your heart,
Mhm.
it's hard to hide your passion. It's hard to hide your enthusiasm. And I know that's a weird word during
Mhm.
COVID to hear
Mhm.
enthusiasm,
Mhm.
but I feel energized and I feel enthused about what we're doing and what we're going to be doing because it's so needed. Like Feed to the Fire, I think became more needed during the pandemic than it was before.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
we can talk about that too. But my enthusiasm is genuine.
Yes, and it comes through, and that's what people connect with because we can see your heart behind it and really be able to see how it's changing lives and connecting people that especially right now are more isolated.
Mhm.
So my favorite part of meeting people is, what's your story and what led you to create Feet to the Fire? Our journeys take us somewhere, and now we're here. So how did we get here? Where is this
Where did it
going?
all begin? It
Where did
began
it
in
all
my living
begin?
room. Yeah, no, it began in my living room, literally in my living room.
Mhm,
And it began because I was unhappy with my direction. You know,
mhm, mhm,
I pursued my education, majored in English, and then I got an MFA in writing, which is, that was like the best years of my life learning.
mhm.
And then I began teaching shortly after I finished my MFA, and I taught at the college level and I taught writing for years. And so I had all of that like under my belt, but you know, and I turned 50 that year. It was weird. It was like I turned 50 and everything just felt like it needs to change. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what I'm
Mhm,
supposed to be doing, but I'm not doing
mhm.
it.
Right.
And so it began as a seed of an idea. I wanted to just bring people together and I wanted to do it in a non-classroom way. So, I'm like, I have a living room. That's what I want. I have a
Mhm.
fireplace. It's cozy. The whole notion just made sense. Um, and so those initial workshops I did in my living room and with people who I didn't even know. And so it was one of those things. I mean, I don't want to minimize it, but it is sort of like, okay, you build it and then see who shows up. And
Yeah.
I kind of did do that, and they
Mhm.
did show up, and they
Mhm.
kept showing up.
Mhm.
And so what I learned very quickly was that people value the connection. They value writing, because I wanted my tribe around me, people that love to write. They
Mhm.
value those things, but they also really showed me that it's possible that you could take an idea and you could turn it into a thing,
Mhm.
and suddenly that thing became a business, and then it
Mhm.
grew and it grew. And I always have to explain that, part of the vision of what Feet to the Fire became after those initial first workshops in my living room had so much to do with my father, because my father, who died in 2012 before I started Feet to the Fire, he wrote a lot. And my dad was not a writer per se.
Mhm.
He owned a business, he ran a business. That was his identity in life. And, he raised 7 kids with my mom. And, um, but after he retired and sold his business because he had to, because his health was declining, he turned to writing. And he'd always been a really good writer, but he turned to it as a source of comfort and
Mhm.
as a source of probably closure with a lot of pieces of his life, because he was, in his late 70s, early 80s. So that was there, that influence was there.
Right.
I'm a writer. I love to write. Obviously, I went and studied it, and
Mhm.
have taught. And so it all made sense. And
Mhm.
then as it started to kind of turn, the writing workshops, became, my mom suggested it. She's like, well, your dad loved writing so much, and you're running these writing workshops in your living room. Why don't you try going to, a retirement community and see if they would
Mhm.
let you do a writing workshop?
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, that's what I'll do.
Mhm.
And I did. And it was interesting because I thought, and this is how you learn, but I thought I had to do it differently
Mhm.
because they were older people, which
Mhm.
is, it couldn't have been further from the truth.
Right.
All I had to do was just go in there and do it like I've always done it. And that is
Mhm.
lead people in the way that I know people like to be inspired with writing. And
Mhm.
it worked.
Mhm.
And my very first group was like 6 or 8 people. The oldest person in that group was 97.
Mm.
And he told me, and I still hear him to this day, he said, we are your first group and you'll never forget us because you never forget your first.
Oh, it's so true.
And I haven't,
Mhm.
because that was where I really kind of like tested this.
Mhm.
Um, but it was me leading the groups.
Mhm.
So, that's
Mhm.
kind of where it began, and where it's gone is like more of the story. But it started
Yeah.
as just a little seed of an idea. And
Mhm.
people ask too, why is it called Feet to the Fire Writers Workshops?
Mhm.
And that's really easy to explain.
Mhm.
One, I'm a writer and I wanted to have, a creative name.
Mhm.
I've kicked myself many times because it's such a long name,
Mhm.
but it has to be what it is.
Yeah.
And so it was the idea that there was fire, and fire is usually warm. And it usually, people gather around the fire traditionally,
Mm.
tell their stories, to share their experiences. And Feed to the Fire, the phrase has to do with
Mhm.
accountability. And I think
Mhm.
people wanted accountability when it came to writing. And that's why they
Mhm.
liked the program. So
Mhm.
Feed to the Fire Writers Workshops it was, and I trademarked the name, and I thought I better snag this, it's
Yeah.
mine, I better keep it.
Yeah.
And and I did. So
Mhm.
that's where it started for sure,
Mhm. Mhm.
in my living room.
Yeah. And that is what is so meaningful for people to hear. It really is about, we get those downloads of ideas and we don't always know where they're going, but you trusted just taking one foot in front of the other, and the response that people gave you and those residents that gave you feedback for that group, and you saw how it transformed lives, which is leading you into even having a bigger impact for more and more people, which is so powerful. It really is.
I thought that initially, when I began working with older adults in senior living communities, I thought it was all about helping them capture their legacy, right?
Mhm,
And so that was my focus. That was
mhm,
my why, I guess. But really, it's about so much more. Like yes, they write tons of stories, and they are
mhm,
amazing stories, like stories
mhm,
that they've never written down,
mhm,
things that they've never talked about sometimes. And they're not always real excited to share them with their family.
mhm.
So there's that safety net within the group that they don't have to share it with anybody but the people that
Right.
they're with. But what I quickly learned was it's not just about legacy. Legacy is important, and our
Mhm,
families want these stories, no
mhm,
doubt.
mhm,
But what I learned was it has to do with providing a sense of purposeful quality experience for people while they're still here. And
mhm,
writing is one of the most therapeutic ways for us to
mhm,
engage with ourselves. And
mhm,
then when we share our stories with others, it just gets
mhm,
better, um,
mhm.
because we get validation. So it has
Yeah.
to do with connectedness, it
Mhm,
has to do with expression. I think that when you can express yourself in word,
mhm,
write it down, you
mhm,
let it out, closure. I think that happens in our writing workshops because, I mean, let's face it, if you have lived a life and you've had all kinds of things happen to you, good and bad,
mhm.
you want to have some sort of like measure to look back at what your life has been, and then somehow capture it.
Right.
And I never ever say to people, let's write your life story, because I think that's
Mhm.
daunting.
So
So we just
daunting.
chip away. It's really daunting. So we just chip
Yeah.
away at it, and
Yeah.
it's the chipping away that all of a sudden you wind up and you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got journals full of stories. And yeah, sure enough, we will die, and those stories will be there. Our families can have them. But there are
Mhm.
a number of people that, they say, I'm not sharing these. They can have them when I die. You know,
Yeah.
I'm doing them for me right
For
now.
me, yes, yes. It's so healing and therapeutic when we can write out what's in our head. I think a lot of times our thoughts and emotions always don't make sense when they're up in our minds. And the art of being able to get it out on paper and to really read back and to kind of distill it down for us and what we're feeling and thinking, and then be able to decide what we want to share out of that and then what we want to keep to ourselves.
Right. And even the parts that we write that we keep to ourselves,
Mhm.
that's very valuable too.
Mhm. It
It
really
has to
is.
do with, and I know this so much as a writer, as a teacher, um,
Mhm.
it has so much to do with just expression, taking it from here and out into a tangible something in front of you, that whether it's the screen. I
Mhm.
do prefer writing by hand because
Mhm.
there is a lot of research behind the connections that our brain makes when we use a pen or a
Mhm.
pencil and we write things out by hand. That can be difficult for older people sometimes, depending on, what's going on with them. But for the most part, people do write things down by hand. And I think
Mhm.
that it's very helpful, but certainly, you can use a keyboard.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah.
My side note, my son and my daughter they're learning so much with writing with the computer, which is a wonderful skill. But we're trying to encourage them to write on paper all the time, because while we can have the art of using our computer, there's nothing that replaces the pen to paper. And those stories for generations, I mean, historically, that was what's done. And we miss out on that art of those letters and the writing we've had in the past using technology. So there's those pros and cons to both.
There is, but there's something about seeing someone's handwriting,
Mhm.
especially when they're gone.
Yeah, it's a piece
Um,
of remembrance.
it
Mhm.
is, and it's the essence, of them, and it's like
Mhm.
hearing their voice. I
Mhm.
I ran across my dad's handwriting the other day, and just seeing it conjured this feeling of,
Mhm.
remembrance. It's powerful. It's very powerful.
It
And
is.
even though my dad had terrible handwriting, I couldn't ever read what it said. It was like
Mhm.
really hard to read. But
Yep.
at the same time, it was his. And that
Mhm.
made it all, I don't know, it made it all worthwhile. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's share with everyone, what is Feet to the Fire? So, how does it live in the different ways? Let's start there and then we can go into how we can incorporate that for people.
So, Feet to the Fire is a licensed expressive writing program that originally we offered to senior living communities. So, we would offer them a license to use the program that's curriculum based and materials to allow their residents to take part in writing workshops in the communities, and then training virtually for their staff, their life enrichment staff, their activity directors, et cetera, so that they can, in essence, recreate the Feet to the Fire experience in their
Mhm.
communities. And that's still there. That's not gone. It just looks
Mhm.
different now because of COVID. So that is essentially what Feet to the Fire became after it started in my living room.
Right.
I mean, I'm talking skip through a few
Yep.
years, and it
Yep.
eventually turned into a product, a licensed product, a program, and something that was very needed, I think, in senior living communities in terms of programming.
Mhm.
So, as a teacher, I realized that that was something very, very important,
Mhm.
because typically, activity directors love to find things that are already built, right? They don't have
Mhm.
time to go into all of the, rigmarole of building a whole program. But if
Mhm.
there's something that they can take, that they can just open the box, they know they have the skills because they've been trained,
Mhm.
and they can deliver, that's so much easier.
Yeah.
And the residents love the program. So
Mhm.
so that's initially how it started. It's
Mhm.
also now, and we can talk about this more, it's merged into also a consumer version, because we have an awful lot of people not in senior living, but who are aging at home in place,
Mhm.
and or because of COVID, they are
Mhm.
restricted and have to kind of stay close to home,
Right.
because maybe they have, health issues, or it's just not safe right now really for any of us
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
out and about and
Mhm.
socializing with others. So there was a need, and it made sense to also create the consumer version of Feet to the Fire. It's a version of this. It's a variation on the version. How's that?
Right. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
And that's really what people need, is you have identified what that need is, and then you're able to disperse it in different ways to meet people where they're at. So I can really attest to both sides of it, but on the senior living side, being a former life enrichment director, there's nothing better than being able to have that product, that programming put together that I can take and incorporate it into a program and
Mhm.
have it all ready for me. And it takes that guesswork out of not having a writing background, being able to carry that out with my residents and having it all together. And then on the other side of having family members that are home and wanting to connect with them, and we'll go into that as well. Really looking at, we're coming into a time of the holidays, and it's usually surrounded by a lot of family, and this year looks so different, and it is challenging because we're not able to physically possibly spend time with our loved ones
Mhm.
and find that connection. How can we use Feet to the Fire to engage our loved ones and to connect with them?
Absolutely. I imagine that if you're looking at residents who are in senior living, let's just take that for
Mhm.
an example. They are, depending on where things are in the pandemic and where we
Mhm.
are in terms of surge and so forth, they may be spending a lot of time alone in their room because they have to, because they can't socially congregate. So, writing in and of itself is a very, individual process. You do it on your own with yourself. So, the reason that we created the kits was, well, if somebody's going to be using this by themselves, they want to be able to kind of self-directed write, and be able to follow along with some very basic steps and why and how. So we provide that for them. So I think about in terms of how beneficial is it to have something for someone to spend time with each day, like as if yoga, as if exercise, as if any kind of ongoing practice. Writing is good that way. And I know that, I have a mother who's 90, and I know that her daily, what she does is quilting, because that's her purposeful thing to do. She's creating things. And writing is no different. Music, art, they're all very similar. You have a goal, it's purpose driven. You have something to do. It's better than scrolling through the anxiety producing news. It's better than watching meaningless television. Although Netflix has some good shows.
Right.
And it takes the place of boredom. It helps us not be so bored. We can entertain ourselves. And I think that this is kind of the part of the problem. When I was a little kid, my mom would say, go entertain yourself. And and it didn't mean watch television. I think that is something that we're all faced with right now, is having to figure out, how do we entertain ourselves when it's just us and us and us, right?
Right.
So I think about that. And then I think about, why is that valuable to a family, who cannot see their loved one, is because I think as a son or a daughter or a grandchild or a great grand, you want to know that your person is feeling rather happy and rather okay. And if they are feeling like they're satisfied and they're doing something, you can share it with them. You can Zoom, you can call them on the phone if they can't figure out how to do Zoom or FaceTime. Even calling them on the phone, is a good connection. And that's an old connection, right? I mean, we've had the telephone around for a long time.
Yes.
So, I envision that if people are writing and creating these stories, it's easy to pick up the phone and say, hey, I'd like to read you a story. And then the connection happens, right? And it happens between families that way. And I just think it's got to be valuable for a family to feel like mom or dad or grandmom, granddad is not just sitting there being sad. With nothing to do. That to me spoke volumes. And I realized, I think I mentioned this to you when we talked. I read an article back in the summer that it really punched me in the gut. It was the notion that because of the length of this pandemic that we are facing, and the time that it's going to take for us to get back to somewhat a sense of normalcy, there are a number of people that will in fact die during the pandemic, and this will be the end of their lives. And so my feeling is, we have to make it as quality and memorable as possible. It's like making the best of a bad situation. So that's what I think Feet to the Fire brings to people. And when they are able to, once they write stories and they're able to share with others, they feel that sense of accomplishment, connection. It's the social determinants of health, finding the social connection, so important, because you feel heard, you don't feel like you're just sitting there withering away.
And that sense of purpose, which is so important, because especially now when a lot of things are put on hold and we're not able to leave our homes very well or have those things in place that we used to be a part of and doing. And we all need that sense of purpose and that sense of hope that okay, every day this is my purpose and I'm going to be able to share and kind of walk through that program. And really highlighting it is the time for the holidays for family members that are thinking of, what do I give my loved one? This would be a perfect gift idea that that could bring people together, and they could incorporate this in their holiday routine that's going to carry out for the new year. Have a New Year's like family resolution that we're going to create and write together. Would be such a great idea. And what are those benefits of writing? I think there's so many different benefits of writing.
Well, first of all, from a cognitive standpoint, it's, I always, they used to say that people should work crossword puzzles, for example, to keep their memory fresh and so forth, and keep their word finding skills. Writing is like a crossword puzzle times a zillion, right? Because within our program, they're taking a prompt and they're having to make sense of it. And that is a lot of brain work, right? So writing down something based on an idea, a word or a phrase or something like that, and creating a story around it that's typically usually true. I mean, they write fiction if you want. I always say I never would know, like I don't know the person. I would be like, you could lie to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's the idea that they're putting their words and they're using word finding skills and they're stringing sentences together is incredibly, incredibly cognitively rich, right? And so we know that. And there's tons of research behind the benefits of writing and how good it is for our brain. Does it help to stave off, memory loss and that sort of thing? I don't know. Potentially, it certainly can't hurt because writing has been around forever. We've been writing things down forever. That's a definite benefit. As far as feeling a sense of accomplishment, I think is really important. If you are kind of tangled up in your head in terms of like worry and anxiety and feelings of loss that we're all feeling right now in this pandemic, if you can harness that and write down your feelings, and maybe it's through a prompt and maybe it's through just what you need to say. Sometimes, people just need to get things out. And it's not, talking isn't the same. It's like you could talk to somebody and tell somebody some things, but sometimes it's writing is very personal. It's a conversation that you have with yourself. And sometimes we need that. And I think those are some mental health reasons that why this is very important right now. We can kind of get right with ourselves,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the best way I can explain it. Whenever I have struggled in my life, writing has always been there for me. And it's been a way to kind of straighten out the thoughts that are tangled up. When I'm able to share it with other people, it gets even better then, right? Because they are also going down that same mission and path. And if you're working toward a common goal with a group, you feel better. You feel connected. You feel like you're part of something. And that's why we created the virtual groups too, because it's like we want to give people, a place where they can converge and they're writing and writing. And some people really want to connect. Some people don't. And that's okay too. But, to be able to have the option is really important.
I think a lot of times people have had a lot of life circumstances that have happened to them or that they've witnessed and that they've gone through. And no one's ever asking the question to prompt any of that conversation. And they might want to share about it. Have you found this to be a safe place for people to do that? And are conversations happening that might not have happened without someone facilitating that?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
That's the quick answer.
Right.
Absolutely. I have witnessed some incredible conversations between people in groups that, and they say, I've never shared that with anyone. I've never told that story to anyone. I've never written that story down.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
get goosebumps, they'll say,
mhm, mhm,
So I think to answer your question, absolutely, yes. People are finding that they are able to engage with pieces of their lives
mhm,
that they never stopped to think about until
mhm,
now,
mhm,
and it's like
mhm,
that happened. And it
mhm,
could be a very funny, good thing,
mhm,
or it could be a
mhm,
sad thing or whatever. But it's sort of like examining your life is very
mhm,
important. And
mhm,
especially, I think it's very important when you're in your final years of your
Mm.
life. I can't imagine that there's anything to me more valuable than to go out of this world knowing that I've understood what my life has been. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It does.
Like
It
I
does.
I think that, and this is a bit of another topic, but I just will say this. I think that
Mhm.
we do very well birthing people into this world, right?
Mm.
Celebrate and we anticipate, but we don't die well in this world, in this country. Some countries do it better than we do, but
That
we
is
don't
so
die
true.
well. Like
Mm.
we get hooked up to machines and tubes and this and that, and I think that there's so much that needs to be recognized before we're gone. At least if we can do that through stories, through writing our own stories and realizing what our life has meant, it's easier to go. It's like not having regrets. I think that that to
Right.
me is so important. And that's coming from a woman who's 56, and I know
Mm.
I've got some years to go potentially, but I feel like I've arrived at that notion. It's very important to have
Mm.
these conversations, to write these stories down so that we can find closure.
You are so spot on with we don't die well here, or acknowledge that in the sense of it's so true. We have celebrations for birth and graduation and all of these things that happen in the first part of our life, if we're looking at it as a whole. And possibly retirement, is celebrated, but then there's not that continued celebration of the rest of our life, so
Mhm.
to speak. And so being able to continue to acknowledge that and glean the wisdom from that and talk about it and share the legacy in a way and feel like you're really being able to be seen and heard. As we age, there's so much that we have to offer people, right? We've
Oh,
learned so many
absolutely.
lessons and we've walked through so many, that our older generation has seen more change in our world than any of us. And what they've learned, they've witnessed, and their insight into it. And then, right, it's going to vary through one based on their life perspective and their lens. And I think what it does is with the writing, it gives that focal point. A lot of times in different conversation, families always don't know how to relate or connect with the older person in their life.
Mhm.
And I'm a firm believer that it's really hard to grow in your deeper relationship with people if you don't ask questions to learn about who they are, what they love, how they want to spend their time. I think we have a lot of assumptions, but we
Right.
have to continue to learn because we all evolve. Like the 40-year-old me is so different than the 20-year-old me.
Right.
And you're constantly changing and evolving. And that happens till we pass on
That's
all the
right.
time.
I can tell you a real quick story. There was a gentleman who was in one of the writing workshops that I was running in person,
Hmm.
and he came into the group. He was a little reticent about starting writing, but he had curiosity, and he was 98 years old. Okay, and I'm like, I'm always amazed, always amazed. Here's the thing. He showed up every single week. He had a story that he'd written. He typed them. He had a computer in his room, so he typed
Hmm.
these stories, and it was cool because there were like typos, and he would print them out and he would bring
Mm.
them. And he was in the group for a total of 6 weeks, literally 6 weeks, and then he died. And I have his last story that he wrote, and it's incredible. The way that he put his thoughts together over 4 pages was incredible. So there you go. I mean, it's that sense of, would the family know to ask this thing? Would the family even know that he felt the way he felt, or she
Hmm.
felt the way she felt? I mean, I think that what happens, and this is an ageism thing, but as we get older, we tend to become more invisible,
Hmm.
and that is the thing that I'm constantly trying to, push against. It's like
Hmm.
we're very much still vibrant and alive, and we have
Hmm.
thoughts and feelings and, opinions, and it doesn't go away.
Hmm.
It certainly doesn't go away. And we're very able very able to do so many things, of course, because we're still alive,
Yes, yes.
we're still alive. So I feel strongly that whether it be whatever form of self-expression, whether it's art or music or writing or quilting like my mom, whatever it is, we have to nurture it in ourselves, have people help us nurture it, suggest we nurture it so that we can live as fully as possible, ourselves happy and occupied. And life is fleeting. It is by a blink. So yeah, it's a great way to connect with people. It's a great way for our families to know us better. My dad, all those stories and poems and essays that he wrote before he died, I would read things that I didn't know about, and when he was like 21 years old and I wasn't even a blink in his eye, and I knew him suddenly as a 21-year-old, as a 10-year-old, or I knew him as a 43-year-old struggling, and these are the stories that made up his life. And I think that when we have that, especially when somebody's gone, you feel a sense of reverence, right? You feel a sense of thankfulness that you do that. Share it with you before they're gone. That's amazing. Having it is everything. I've gone to a number of funerals since I started Feet to the Fire because a lot of these people have become friends of mine and they've died. And it's always interesting to me. I went to a funeral a few years ago and the minister came up to me when I got there and she said to me, as if I'm not the daughter, right? But I ran the writing group. But she said, I hope you don't mind, but I've taken some of so-and-so's writing and I'm using it in the homily. And the family was floored and happy that, they had that to draw on. I wish we could have a celebration of life before we're gone.
Yeah. Isn't that true to bring everyone we love together? Yes.
So I sat there in the back of the church and I just kind of quietly cried. Stories I had heard and I could hear her voice. And, it was really meaningful to have that send off. And it was like she was speaking. Really, it is very goosebump stuff. It's life. It's who we are. It's the essence of who we are. I think that's why it's so important. Yeah.
It is. We always see our loved one through the lens of they're a mother or they're a father. I think we lose sight of that. They're the 21-year-old that's starting their life out or the individual person that they are.
Right.
So when you were talking about that and seeing your dad and how he was in all of these different phases of his life, how meaningful to be looking at the person that they are set aside from the role that they've played in our life, because we lose sight of that. And I think it's such a good reminder of how they've interacted with the world and whether it's their partner or their spouse or their place of employment and just all the different ways that they show up. Because when I look at my, example, I look at myself, I'm like, yes, I am a mom, but I'm also my own individual person that loves to like cook or travel or whatever that is. And being able to just have a glimpse of that, to carry that on is such a gift.
It is. It's a gift to the person. And then what they wind up creating in the stories, then that becomes their gift to everybody, whether they realize it or not. It's a gift that they do for themselves at first. And then it's like when they're gone, it's certainly a gift to everybody else.
You talked about this a little bit, and that is where my heart is, right? From that life engagement and enrichment standpoint, is really focusing on those individual interests and abilities and how, like you talked about someone in your life that loves to quilt and that's their thing. And I think each person does have those components that give them that value and those things to live for, right? And that what's important is looking at each person as an individual and identifying what that is and then helping them live that out. But with that said, I personally believe writing is so universal. So what would you say to people that maybe haven't written before? Maybe it's not a part of their hobby, so to speak. How is that important for them? And they start this journey if they've never tried it before? They've never been historically a writer.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that we really focus on in Feed the
Mhm.
Fire, and typically it is people that have never written before.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
that's why it was so important to me, as from a teaching standpoint,
Mhm.
to help people feel inspired to and curious.
Mhm.
Curiosity is the first step, right?
Mhm.
Just be curious. If you've never tried something before, give it a try.
Yeah.
If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. If it becomes your thing, that's even better, right? But you've got these different, if
Mhm.
we can give people tools and ways that they can engage with themselves and others, then they have a choice and they have things to do, right? So um when we're younger, we're busy with work and raising children maybe, and
Mm.
living our lives and traveling and doing all the things. But then as we get older, that doesn't stop. There's lots of people who are still very, very, very active, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's great.
Yeah.
But there's so many experiences even younger people don't have yet. So
Right.
give them the experience, give them the opportunity. With writing, it's, yes, I've never tried this before. Okay, let's try it.
Mhm.
How hard could it be? Well, can you pick up a pen? Yes.
Mhm.
Can you write down a sentence? Probably. I don't know if I can
Mhm.
read it. My handwriting is
Mhm.
bad. We hear all this stuff,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
that's fine. Can you read it? If someone else
Mhm.
can't read it, can you read it?
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. You're engaging with yourself anyway. And
Mhm.
so I always take it from, write a sentence. It might be the best damn sentence you've ever
Mhm.
written. Write another and another and another. All of a sudden there's a paragraph. Then you've got more. And it's almost like you're walking, right? And you just keep walking with the
Mm.
sentences. And
Mhm.
suddenly you have a page. And then
Mhm.
there's another. And then you're into it. And so what we
Mhm.
hear oftentimes from people who are using our program is they engage. And that's the key. It's
Mhm.
engagement. They engage
Mhm.
with themselves. They while away time. They say it practically wrote itself, that
Mm.
story.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's magic. Um,
Yeah.
you did it.
Mhm.
Once they do it, they gain confidence.
Mm.
They gain
Mhm.
confidence that they can actually try something and be successful at it. And what is success? It
Mhm.
depends on how you look at it. The first thing that we always say is, we're not trying to be published writers here. If you
Mhm.
want to get published, we can help you figure out how to do that. We're just trying to be in the process of writing. Important.
Mhm.
So let's start with that.
Yeah.
The bar is down low.
Right.
We're not
Right.
trying to have an audience. So then people give it a try. And then we
Mhm.
always say, if it's not your cup of tea, then it's not.
No harm in trying. And
I
that's
learned to
really
play a clarinet. That's really hard.
yes, yes, there could be many more challenging things.
Yes,
And that's really a myth of when it falls into that ageism that we're trying to fight so much is
yes.
that the myth is okay, they're set in their ways. They've never done this. We're just going to let it be. And we're fighting against that because it's the whole mindset of lifelong learning. And we don't say that just to say it because it sounds really good.
Yeah,
It's true and it's
true.
accurate, and we have to support that. And that's what really drew me to you and your story is the creativity behind it and the idea that we can still have that lifelong component of learning and doing something new and engaging with our families in a different way, because a lot of times I'm finding that having a younger generation in my life, and you've got grandkids and great grandkids, and they don't always know how to interact with the older person in their life. And I think it
Right.
really helps to set up those parameters, and you've created this beautiful kit that walks people through a way to spend time with their loved one, ask questions, do something together, learn and grow in a very approachable, easy way to do that, which I think people need right now. There's so much energy
Yes,
spent on just trying to figure out what to do. And now we've got a good way to do that.
right. The kids actually take people away from the screen as well.
Mhm,
And that's
mhm,
important. I think we spend
mhm.
a lot of time on screens, no matter how old we are. I see
Right.
babies with
Mhm.
iPads, and
Yes.
it's nuts. And
Mhm,
and even older people,
mhm,
with television and
mhm,
screens.
mhm,
And so I think about that, and I think, having when I was developing the program at all, but also when I was developing these individual consumer kits, I
mhm,
felt like this has got to be very hands-on. I
mhm,
don't want it to be tech. It's never been
mhm,
high tech. It's
mhm,
always been high touch.
mhm,
So I
mhm,
want people to meet themselves where they are, and
mhm,
where they are might not be in technology. There's
mhm,
the means to connect through technology if they
mhm,
would like to be in a group. Yes,
mhm,
absolutely. And we can help
mhm,
them do that. But
mhm.
the writing piece has to be hands-on. And
Yeah.
so the kits are very meet them where they are.
Mhm,
And we designed them with the idea that, I mean, you talk about purpose, and I
mhm,
got to say, feet to the fire is my purpose in
mhm,
life right now. It
mhm,
is my why every single day. I get up
mhm,
and I'm like, I know what I need to do today. I've
mhm,
got something else to strive toward. And
mhm.
even this is a sense of purpose, and it will be for as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
um, the writing is creates that sense of I've got to accomplish something
Mm,
today, and I've got
mhm,
something that needs to be done. The kits are a way to open up the box, take out the journal, take out the
mhm,
prompt, settle down with yourself. I'm going to do this today. Every day or several times a week. We hear people in the program who say that they're so thankful at Thanksgiving. They have this program and they mean it.
mhm.
They're sincere. They truly mean it. They're glad that they have something to do that they are creating. Do you feel that sense of purpose and belonging? And that's golden. That is
Right,
golden. That's
right.
exactly what we were hoping for.
And no one can take that away from them.
No. And
Yeah.
nobody else could do it for them either.
Right, right.
That's important.
Yeah.
That was another goal of this program, was to allow people to be authentic, right?
Mhm,
And to
mhm,
write the stories that only they could write,
mhm,
that only they could say, that using only the words that they could use in
mhm,
the way that they use them. That's important. And I've talked to so many people, I've interviewed people, and it's not the same. And telling a
mhm,
story is different than writing a story. Telling
mhm.
stories is very important. Don't get me wrong. I think it's very important. But we tend to tell stories roughly in the same way that we've always told them. We might have variations, but writing is a process of discovery. You discover a lot
Mhm,
about yourself when you
mm.
write.
Yeah, we had
So,
talked about that so much before, which I found, I guess I never really took the time to think about that there was a difference between the two, and that difference between that expressive writing and telling a story. Can you define that more for us as we're
yeah.
talking about
Well,
writing?
storytelling is something that goes back to the Stone Ages, with stories etched into stone walls. And
Mhm,
I mean, we it's our language, it's our culture. For
mhm,
everybody, for human beings, it's a culture. And so there's lots of value in knowing and telling stories. It connects us, it weaves us together. I would never want to undermine or undercut the value of storytelling. I think that's at our core.
mhm,
Writing is a way to tell a story, just that it's a different process than verbalizing, and
mhm,
orally telling. The notion of how it taps into our self expression is because I think we're having to think, and we're having to put down, and we're having to make sense of things. And that's different than when we're talking. When you
mhm,
speak something, it's out of your mouth
mhm,
and it's gone. I mean, it's out there. You
mhm.
can't unspeak it.
Right.
When you're writing, you can think about it. You can think
Mm.
about what you're putting down. Or you're on this path to discovery, and it's sort of like it's writing itself. Where's this
Right.
coming from?
Yeah, it can
Watch it move,
evolve and
can
yeah.
evolve. And
Mhm.
that's a different brain process entirely. It's valuable. They're both valuable.
Mm.
It's just a different process.
And it's neat to have you explain the two because I think at times we just lump them together. But when you really understand how much goes into that expressive writing versus telling a story, I mean, I think a lot of times, right, it's out there and we wish some stories we could take back or I say it a different way or elaborate on, but it gives that almost that critical mind piece of walking through what am I thinking? What do I want to put the pen to paper, having it evolve, having it, that form of therapy in a way. Absolutely.
It is incredibly therapeutic. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and that's not just Angela saying that,
Mm-hmm.
there's research that talks about it, much
Mm-hmm.
research, and
Mm-hmm.
that's good. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're struggling with a problem and you're trying to figure out your
Mm-hmm.
an answer to something, you need to have a conversation with yourself. We have lots of them in our head.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay, but when we take it out of our head and we write it down, we commit it to some form, paper, or I prefer paper, then we can see it in front of us. And suddenly it becomes a different process. We're not trying to wrangle with it in our head. We're looking at it and maybe letting some things out and go. I'm not against writing on a computer. It's just that when we're on a computer, typically, let's just say using Chrome, which
Right.
is brilliant and also crazy because we
Ah,
there's a lot of things vying for our attention when we're on a
mm,
computer
so
versus when
true.
we're quietly curled up in a chair or wherever we curl up with a
Mhm,
notebook and we're
mhm,
writing it out. We don't
mhm.
have to have all the competing noise that's out there. Just one thing.
Yeah, it is.
But
And
at the same time, I know that there are people, if we're talking about engaging people who are in their later years, there may be some barriers, and we know that. And there may be barriers with regard to stroke or
mhm,
Parkinson's, memory loss, and cognitive decline. And we understand that. So we challenge people to give it a go and give it a
mhm,
try. And it's amazing what I've seen people do. If
mhm,
people, though, cannot physically write, they could then engage with the person, their caregiver, their family member, to, in a pinch, tell the
mhm.
story and let them scribe the story down and then give it back to them. And then they can say, oh, there it is in front of me.
Yeah,
There are ways around some of that. It's just that we know that if we can get people to do it themselves, it's really important.
it is. And such good advice to adapt if needed,
Mhm.
which is always
Always adapt. Yeah.
we're in a world of adapting right now
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
so
We're
many
always
ways.
adapting. And that's
Oh,
the humanness of us. We
it
have to
is.
figure things out. It's a problem, we have to figure it out.
It is. So I have loved hearing some of the stories about people that you've worked with. Do you have one that really just, gosh, you go to because it gives you so much life and you really want to share it with us? I think it connects us and really we can see the impact of that if you could tell us about that.
One,
Ah, okay,
I
or
at this
many, I don't
point,
know.
I know, it's like, oh my gosh, let me figure out which one. In this process and in building the program and launching this program in this version, and the podcast, and um
Mhm.
I've met so many interesting people. I mean, I can't even tell you, hundreds,
Mhm.
maybe thousands at this point. So many people I've met through this journey in the past, 6 years of starting and growing Feet to the Fire. There's been a few people that have stood out to me quite truthfully. I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman who, early on when I started doing this in care communities, who came to the group. He was an older gentleman. He's the oldest person that's ever done Feeds and Fire,
Mhm.
to my knowledge. He was 103. He used a walker, and that's all. Like, he
Mhm.
was pretty.
Mhm.
He was pretty
Yeah.
spry. He was very mobile. He had this gleam in his eye. He had these
Mm,
very blue eyes, and he had almost a teasing look.
mhm,
But he
mhm,
also was pretty skeptical. And
mhm.
for men to do this, it's typically kind of interesting when men do this.
Yeah,
Not that they can't, it's just that
right.
women would grab onto this faster typically than men would.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
anyway, here he came into the group, and it was more like, what's this all about? And he had that sense of curiosity.
mhm.
And I said, well, we're just going to kind of see how this goes every week. And, the idea is that you're going to write a story, and a story about what? And I said, well, about your life. And he said, oh, well, I got lots of those. And I said, yeah, we all have lots of those. And he basically said, he was reticent, and he was a little resistant, but he did it. And once he latched on to doing it, he kept showing up week after week after week. Here was the interesting part. He was writing these stories down. He wouldn't use the journal. He would use like whatever he had on hand. And it might be the back of an envelope or, whatever. He would take and he would write these stories. And sometimes they'd be just snips, right? Just like several paragraphs. And then he would stuff them he lived in a congregate care community. He would stuff them into the drawer in his desk in his room. Didn't share them with his family. Tell his family he was doing this. Like, to their knowledge, they didn't know he was in a writing.
Right.
And then, he's 103. He died one night when the family went back to clean out his room and gather his belongings. They found those stories. Now that is like, whoa. And I've only found that out because I went to his funeral. I met his family who I'd never, ever met. And they said, oh, we found the stories. And so they had photocopied them and given them to all the grandchildren. I mean, it was like,
my gosh.
that made it all.
Yes.
That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
It made
worth
sense
it.
to him, and it mattered to him while he was doing it to write those stories. And then he didn't have a big need to share them with his family. He was doing it for himself. So that is a story that sticks with me forever.
Oh, the richness too of how he spent those last few months is so powerful.
Yeah, that lives with me. I need to be writing a book about all this because, it's my journey and the people. And no two stories are the same. It's so incredible. You would not believe the stories. You would not believe. I mean, that's why we started the podcast, because I was feeling panicked in the pandemic. And that, I thought these people's voices cannot go quiet. I mean, my goodness, they still need to be heard, especially now. And so I started recording them and interviewing them and having them read their stories. And there's a lot of appeal to that, in that I wanted it to be not video. I wanted it to be audio, because there's something so precious about hearing someone's voice and to have it last.
And it lives on. That's one thing I've really grown to appreciate about that podcast format, is that it lives on. Like you said, it's that evergreen, and those voices can be heard, especially once they pass on. To hear someone's voice, there's nothing more powerful than that. And for them to share the stories on their own.
Yeah, I would give anything to have my dad reading his stories, and to all of the grandchildren and great-grands and great-great-grands that will come later on. I think it's so important to have the voice behind the story. If you're trying to think about gifts for your family, your older adults in your family, I suggest having a conversation with someone, whoever that may be, your grandmother or your grandfather or your parents, and asking them, what are you interested in right now? Would you be interested in this or that? Now, a lot of times people don't know what they're interested in, and they feel rather exhausted maybe in this pandemic that we're in right now. And to have to think of doing something is like, gosh, why would I do that?
Right.
But there's so many cool options out there. And I think that they all revolve for me around the arts, art and writing and music, creating. I
and
think
learning
anything that
and
allows
growing.
someone to
Yes.
create things where you're creating, and yes, maybe you're creating a connection between you and your loved one. If you're just creating for yourself, I think that's really, really important. So anything that's going to engage someone so that they can explore.
Yes.
And there's any number of there's any number of things out there. And I would say this, don't look for things necessarily that are age appropriate.
I 100% agree with you.
What do I mean? Like when they came out with adult coloring books, I thought, A, that sounds a little, and then B, they're so interesting, right? Orders them all the time. She loves them because she's a quilter and she loves color and she loves putting color together and it stimulates her. She loves knitting and crocheting and all those things. She loves working with her hands. So if someone loves working with their hands, if there's not something out there that someone has created, like, I've created these kits. These kits are kind of evergreen in the sense that you don't have to be like an old person to use these kits.
Right.
They're fun. I didn't want them to even like look like they were for an older population.
Yeah.
So I would say don't put an age limit on something.
True. So
What
true.
if you're 85 years old and you adore doing something that 15-year-olds love to do?
Yeah, embrace it.
What is
Go
that?
for it.
Imagine how
Breathe life.
that work. Yeah, I think it busts the whole notion of ageism, of course.
It does. We have to bust it wide open. And I feel like there's some good momentum right now, and we're highlighting that. And I also love that you talked about the art of creating. There's a sense of accomplishment we get when we create things, and that purpose, and we're able to pour and reach different parts of our brain that we haven't really done before, thinking outside of not necessarily for that age group, which is so important. I mean, side note, my grandmother, one of her favorite things to do, and granted, this is watching a TV show, but speaking to the age limit thing, was we would watch The Bachelor together. And it was her, and it was one of her favorite things. And she's like, I love watching 20. And then she would tell me about the men she would date and the handsome men out of the service. And it kind of reignited her memories of what it was like to be 20 and dating, and bringing light to that. And,
That's funny.
in a different way. And that quote unquote probably wasn't directed at her age group, so to speak, but she loved it.
But she had something to say about it, and she had something to add. And I think that when we do something, we make something, we create something, it's our contribution. And having a contribution is really important to feeling like you're part of the whole.
Yeah.
And I can say it that succinctly. It's being like you want to be part of the whole. You don't want to be cast aside. You want to be in the mix.
And that is the longing that never leaves us our whole life, is to be part of the whole.
Absolutely.
So I think on that note, we're going to just really end thinking about how we can be part of that whole and encourage people in our lives to feel valued, that they have purpose, that they are contributing deeply to who we are. Thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom. So valuable. Thank you.
My little bits of wisdom. I just know that people do surprise you, and they are able to do way more than you give them credit for. You just have to tap into it sometimes, and you just have to ask them to give it a try. And then they surprise you, and they do it. And it's incredible.
It is so incredible. Such a gift.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.